Today's episode is raw, it's real, and this might just save somebody's life. Patrick Foster was living what looked like the picture-perfect life. He was a professional athlete that turned into a beloved teacher with a very tight-knit family, an incredibly loving partner, and a promising career. But beneath it all, he was hiding a devastating secret. He was a compulsive gambling addict. For over a decade, Patrick lived a double life. He was placing bets in secret, he was lying to everyone he loved, and was literally spiraling into hundreds of thousands in debt. The moment he placed a £50,000 bet on one horse might bite, he watched his life unravel. In today's conversation, we go there. We talk about the lies, the shame, the suicidal moment at Slough Station, and how he clawed his way back to recovery. Patrick's story is a brutal reminder that gambling addiction is invisible and it's deadly, but it also proves that recovery is possible. Welcome to Stefanie, where every week I'm going to introduce you to the people behind jaw-dropping, life-altering, true stories from all over the world. I'm Stefanie Jones, TV host, storyteller, and your partner in crime for the wildest podcast ride you've ever been on. Each episode, you'll hear shocking stories that'll make you realize we humans are capable of anything. Now, let's spill the tea. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me. I think you're incredibly brave and have become such an advocate and role model to others that I had to talk to you.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
I want to talk to you first of all about your gambling addiction and living a double life at the time. Can you take me back to the first time that you ever placed a bet?
Yeah, I guess my kind of start of my gambling journey, so to speak, was different to a lot of people because I didn't start gambling in any way, shape or form really till I was 19 years old. It wasn't part of my life. I hadn't been brought up with it. It wasn't something that any of my family ever really did or friends before that. So it wasn't something that I'd been exposed to. And then when I was 19, I went to university, and of course at university you have a bit more freedom, a bit more independence. You meet different people. And one Saturday morning, like a lot of students, a bit hungover from the night before, a few guys that I'd got to know said to me, look, they were going down to what they referred to as the bookies, which is a betting shop, to put some bets on the football. And I didn't have much else to do, and I thought, why not? Let's go and see what this is all about. We walked into this betting shop. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I walked in there and I was intrigued. I was pretty couldn't believe all the screens that were around and sport, which is something that I love going on. And I was kind of wrapped by the whole atmosphere and environment. I watched most of the time I was in there, I watched this guy feed £20 notes into a machine, playing roulette on a fob tee machine. And I was gripped watching him do it. He eventually sort of stormed out the shop. I sat down in the chair that he was in. I had £2 in my pocket left over from the night before. I put it in the machine, and genuinely I looked at the machine and there was one number that was different. It was green 0 and it was the last number to come up. And me being that sort of person, I thought, well, what are the chances for happening twice in a row? And I put my £2 in the machine, and about 12 seconds later, 0 came in, £2 became £72. And as I always say, I can genuinely never explain the feeling that moment gave me. I'd never had it before, and actually the irony is I'd never have it again. But all I wanted to do from that moment was to have another go, to play again. And that was kind of how my sort of gambling journey started. I wasn't hooked. Well, I wasn't addicted immediately, I was hooked. But not a day went past for the next 13 years from that moment where I didn't have a bet.
After that initial moment where you can't describe what that feeling was like, but you've never been able to replicate it, or it's never come back since, did you ever imagine in that moment, or in the days that followed where you continued to gamble in whatever format it was, that it would lead to obviously what was later to come in those 13 years?
No, not at all. I think particularly when you're sort of that age, you think you're kind of young, you think you're invincible, To be honest, I didn't really know a gambling addiction existed. I'd never met a gambling addict, all those sort of things. So my kind of thing was, well, this is fun. This is something that I'll do to try and make some money. I'll win, I'll lose, I'll stop when I need to. All those sort of normal things that people think when they first started gambling. And actually, to be honest, for the first kind of year to 18 months that I gambled, my relationship with it is like what a lot of people's is, which is exactly what I've just described. It was kind of fun. It was time and money that I could afford to lose, and I won, I lost, and I kind of enjoyed that kind of roller coaster, but it certainly wasn't negatively impacting my life to the degree that it did years later when it all came to a head.
This was when you was at university, and then you went on to become a professional athlete and also a teacher, and you were thriving as it appeared to everybody else that was on the outside. You got it all together, like you're living these dreams. How did you manage to live such a double life for so long?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't really know how I did, in the sense that I don't really, looking back now, know how I got away with what I did. I think, obviously, as you alluded to, I had kind of 3 careers during my addiction. The first was I was a professional cricketer. When that finished, I found that very difficult to come to terms with, but because I was still deemed to being successful, I got a very good job working in the city in insurance. I don't think anybody ever thought that there was a problem, because I didn't kind of tick the boxes that a lot of addicts, in inverted commas, would. I didn't look like one, I didn't sound like one, I didn't behave like one, and I was just really, really good at keeping it secret. And as time went on, in the early days I very definitely wanted to keep it secret. In the latter days I needed to keep it secret, and I just got better and better at doing it. I found ways of doing it. Obviously, the fact that with something like gambling, you can do it online, you can do it on your phone. It was easier to hide than it might have been. These are often referred to as kind of hidden or invisible addictions, because the signs are harder to spot in people. And I guess the biggest kind of differentiation in my story was the fact that actually most of the time throughout that journey I had money. And I think if people think you've got a gambling problem, they think, well, you won't have any money because you've gambled it all away, which is the case for a lot of people. But in my case, I had a lot of money, but it was always other people's money. So nobody ever thought it could possibly be a gambling problem as serious as it was, because I always had money to do this, that or the other, buy a drink, buy a meal. So I think that is kind of one of the big learnings from my story, that actually just because you've got money doesn't mean that you're not gambling an awful lot. When
you were gambling, like you were saying, you were finding ways to hide it. So maybe it was on your phone or it's online, so people aren't necessarily thinking where on earth is Patrick going. And like you said, using other people's money. So what were some of the lies you were telling to keep it going, or how were you hiding it?
You kind of learn strategies and techniques over the course of time to get away with it. And because I have always been very kind of high functioning as an individual, I just had this amazing ability to kind of keep doing what I needed to and doing all this alongside it. And the scary thing about an addiction is I was almost protecting the addiction, because I would make sure that I got everything done that I needed to. So on the outside, to anybody looking in, it looked like I had all my stuff together and I was doing what I needed to. I was very presentable. But then at the same time, alongside it, I was literally leading this double life, because I would be sat at my computer, on my desk, whatever it was that I'd be doing, and I would be working and I would be gambling at the same time. I didn't sleep, so I would have an extra 12 hours a day that other people wouldn't, to get work done, to carry on gambling. There were so many ways and things that I did that people didn't realise were going on, which just allowed me to do it. I had an amazing ability to kind of turn it on and off like a tap. So when I was in front of people, I was able to hold my emotions together, present myself immaculately, speak very well, but actually when I was on my own, I was broken. I would break down.
Did you ever worry, what if someone catches on, or If I'm up all night or not sleeping, someone's going to notice. Did you ever worry about someone finding out in those times, or were you always so well thought out that you were like one step ahead almost?
I did. I lived in like constant fear about being found out, and I think that made me even better at hiding it. And to a degree, as I said, kind of protecting the addiction, because that was my biggest fear, was being found out. So I kind of went to greater lengths as time went on to make sure that I didn't. And I had to sort of develop other strategies that I didn't use in the early days to kind of cover things up. I was a master of disguise, and I talk to people now who knew me during that period. They can't believe it, because they say, like, you were the last person we thought this was happening to, or this was going on, and everything you did and everything you said was so believable.
Were you in fear of what people would think of what you were doing? Or was it in fear of if they find out they might try and stop me?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't put it better myself. It was all those things. I think a lot of my problems stemmed from, I mean, a lot of addiction is linked to self-worth, self-esteem. But I think for me, I've always been somebody who was preoccupied and obsessed with what other people thought of me. I hate the fear of anybody sort of thinking bad of me, judging me, questioning me. So actually, with living with that meant that I didn't want anybody to find out anything bad about me, let alone kind of what was going on. So there was that. There was the fact that if I got found out, what would the consequences be? And of course, how would I continue to be able to gamble and doing these things? And I now realise and understand that for a long time I didn't want to stop. I wasn't ready to stop, and so I would do everything I could to make sure that I would be able to gamble. My priority was to never be found out, and of course I realise now I was always going to get found out. It was never sustainable. Being found out was the best thing that's ever happened to me ultimately.
You were gambling with other people's money, and in your book you've mentioned borrowing money from friends, family, even parents of students. So how did it get that far? How did you get people to give you the money?
Anybody who's suffered from a gambling addiction knows that kind of you will go to any lengths that you can to make sure that you have money to gamble with. And of course, in the early days I had my own money. I had more disposable money than some people would, and then as time went on I kind of had exhausted all the traditional methods of basically borrowing money from banks, through credit cards, payday loans, all those things that I did. And then it kind of got to the point where, okay, I've now done that. If I turn to people that I know really well, I'll get found out, because people will rightly start asking questions, so I don't really want to go down that route. And then I was kind of faced with a choice of, well, I either start committing crime, I start stealing people off money from people, literally, or I had this kind of one moment one day where I was talking to a parent of a pupil that I taught, and they alluded to the fact that actually, because of their financial situation, that they had been able to support somebody who was struggling with something, and the penny dropped. And I thought, whoa, hold on a second, I could maybe take advantage of that. And I thought, you know what, if you don't try, you don't know. And I did. I'm not proud of what I did, and I'll never forgive myself, but I literally turned around to them and I said, look, this, that and the other was going on in my personal life. It was pretty believable. It was something like I've been hit with a tax bill for various different reasons. I didn't have the money there and then. And people liked me, they respected me, they were ultimately worried about me because I was saying that I was going through difficulty and I didn't have money. They lent me the money, and as I always say, the rest was history, because I'd kind of found this new avenue. And I was very good at saying to people, look, please don't tell anybody and please keep this confidential. And people, again, because they had too much respect for me, they respected that. It just spiraled because I just found this kind of almost like tap.
One example of your gambling was you turned £30 into £28,000, and then you lost 50,000 on race Might Bite. What on earth was that day like, and what did that £1,000 loss trigger within you? Because that's a huge amount of money.
I've come to learn now that actually no amount of money as a gambling addict would ever have been enough. And once I'd kind of got into that kind of spiral and the addiction had got me that badly that actually it wasn't about money. But actually, I didn't know that at the time. I know that now. Of course, people gamble to try and make money, and you're actually most vulnerable when you win, because that's when you kind of feel invincible. You think that's going to happen all the time. If it doesn't, well, you think it will probably happen again. Actually, winning is sometimes the most dangerous thing that can happen, and that's when I started to describe it as like a drug, because when I won a huge sum of money, the next bet that I placed, if it wasn't that big or I didn't get that win, it didn't give me the same rush, the same buzz, the same hit, and that's how an addiction works. But I guess as time went on, my debts just started to get bigger and bigger, and it felt like time was kind of running out and everything was going to catch up with me. And I was constantly saying to myself that all I needed to do is get to a point where I could pay everybody back and the problem would go away. And that was only accelerated when essentially it got to the point where I knew I was going to lose the house that I lived in. I knew I was going to lose my job, and only I knew I might face sort of quite serious criminal convictions as a result of what I've been doing. And at that point I panicked. Of course, what I should have done is I should have reached out for help, but the irony of this addiction, which is actually the only thing that differs it from all other addictions, is the only thing you ever think is going to solve it is actually the thing that's caused it in the first place, because you think it's about money. And I thought, well, I could gamble my way out of it, and I got to the point where I had over £50,000 across 19 different betting accounts. I put it all on one bet, one horse, in the Cheltenham Gold Cup in March 2018. It was at that point that I sort of said to myself, look, if this horse wins, then I will win all that money back, and my intention was to kind of pay off all my debts and life would go on. And if it didn't, then I had reached a point where I thought I can't go on, and I was going to go and do the unthinkable and end my life.
You really were considering taking your own life. Talk to me about what happened that day, because you were thinking about taking your own life at Slough Station. What happened that day, and ultimately what ended up stopping you? It's
obviously difficult to talk about, in the sense that I feel like one of the lucky ones, because I am still here, and sadly lots of people aren't when they reach that point where you really don't see a way out. And people talk about suicide as being very selfish, and it is to a degree in what it leaves behind. But actually, when people are in that situation, they believe what they're doing is selfless, because they think the world's going to be a better place without them. And because of everything that I'd done, the situation that I was in, and the immediacy of what had kind of transpired by losing all that money very quickly, I kind of just thought, I can't do this, I can't carry on. And I'd kind of come pretty close, and I was considering it. But the thing that stopped me was I suddenly, for the first time in a very long time, thought about other people. And I thought, I can't do this to other people, because actually they've not done anything to deserve this. I was faced with a choice. I either was going to do what I was about to do, or I was going to tell somebody and see what their reaction would be. And fortunately for me, I decided to kind of reach out to my brother and just tell him how I was feeling. And he had no idea of quite where I was, or what was about to happen, because I think he probably, understandably, would have reacted in a very different way. But his reaction to that was kind of one of which to say, look, don't you dare do what you're about to do, please. Whatever is going on, just talk to us. He said, be open and honest. He said, you don't think we know, but we all know you're struggling, and we want to know what's going on, we want to know what's wrong, and we'll support you because we love you and we care about you. And that, weirdly, was all that I needed to hear. And that moment was a big turning point, for obvious reasons, because I was then accountable. And I'd actually been, deep down, I'd been desperate for help for so long, but I just found it so incredibly hard to basically admit to people that I'd done all the things that I'd done, and I wasn't who I said I was, or was pretending to be. And that kind of moment allowed me to move on, and fortunately I've not looked back since. And as I say, I feel lucky because I've got a second chance. Sadly, lots of people don't, and that's kind of my main motivation for sharing my story in the way that I do, is if it helps stop one person either doing what I did and going down the route I did, or doing what I was about to do, then it's worth it.
I think it was incredibly brave of you in that moment to reach out for help and to call your brother, because I can imagine the fear of that must have been so overwhelming, you know, given everything that was going on. And I'm so glad that he literally talked you down, talked some sense into you, was able just to reassure you and be there. And then it hopefully gave you a little bit of time, I'm sure, just to catch your breath a bit before you went on to go and talk to your other loved ones and get the help that you needed. How did other people, your loved ones in particular, react once they realised what had really been going on behind closed doors?
I can never explain to anybody how hard it was telling people. It was incredibly difficult, and I think one of the big things is I talk a lot to people about reaching out for help and reaching out for support, and there is nothing more important than that. But that doesn't mean the problem goes away. It doesn't solve everything. It's the beginning, but that is the hardest bit. And actually once I told them, their reaction was so different to how I had played it in my head all those years of what was going to happen. No one kind of went mad, no one disowned me. They all recognised I had a serious problem. They were glad I was still here. But I think the biggest thing was what they said to me at that point was the most important bit. We're going to support you through thick and thin, but you're going to have to play your part in this, because you're the only person that can stop, and you're the only person that can do something about this. And that was what I kind of needed to hear. I then had that accountability. I was answerable to them, and as soon as other people were involved, it meant I was doing it as much for them as I was for myself, and that really helped me. And actually there was just this kind of overwhelming element of relief from us all, including me, that everything was out there. We know what's going on, we can deal with it now. And that was just the start, but everything from that moment was easier. Nothing I had to do or encounter or go through was harder than that initial moment of putting my hands up and saying, look, this is what's going on, I need help.
What were the next steps of recovery for you after you've spoken to people and they know what's going on?
I was very fortunate because I was able to access amazing support and treatment really quickly in a very kind of protected environment. I needed basically time away from everyone and everything to have a long hard look at myself in the mirror, accept what I'd done, take ownership of it. But the most important thing was understanding my addiction and understanding me. I was lucky because I had the luxury of those 6-8 weeks, and there was a lot of soul searching, but those few weeks, along with the support of family and friends and a fair bit of determination, have kind of allowed me to stand on my own 2 feet again and move forward with life. And my recovery is not something, the problem doesn't go away. My addictive personality, nature manifests itself in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways, but I now have self-awareness that I never had before. I'm at peace with the fact that I'm an addict. It's really difficult for people to do that because they've got life to deal with, and I have people reach out to me all the time and they talk to me and they say, I need help, I want help, but I've got bills to pay, I've got family to look after, and I get that, and that's where it is really difficult. My circumstances meant I didn't really have a choice. It's the best thing that happened to me.
How do you resist the urge to gamble today?
Every day I wake up and I try and get through another day without gambling, and every day that goes by I think it gets a little bit easier. I don't have to deal with the same urges and temptations that I once did, and that was something that I had to be patient. I'm also at peace with the fact that I can't do it, that other people can, but I can't, because I know that if I gamble, the circumstances or the consequences will be so bad that I just accept that I can't do it. A bit like if a doctor said to me, look, if I smoked and they said, look, you have a cigarette, you'll die, I wouldn't have a cigarette. And that's kind of how I view gambling. I also get asked how I replace it. nothing will ever directly replace gambling. So I don't try and replace gambling directly. I've found things that kind of evoke similar feelings and emotions that definitely help, and I use those as strategies at times in the moments where I maybe historically would have gambled. But it's just having that self-awareness and that understanding. Relapse is a very real threat. I'm only ever one bet away from serious consequences, but I'm not scared of that. But for my own personal recovery, I don't want to think that I've kind of beaten it and that I'm cured or fixed, because I think that'll probably be when I'm most vulnerable. I have to be really careful about my relationship with other addictive substances and behaviours. But again, that kind of self-awareness and knowledge and understanding means that I have the confidence to kind of get through each day and each week and each month, and I don't have to think about it in the same way that I once did.
All of these experiences and everything that you've been through have led you ultimately to writing your book, My Bite. Was that healing, or was writing it all down kind of traumatic, like reliving everything?
I wrote the book for two reasons. One was, three reasons actually. One was a genuine desire to try and help somebody else by sharing my story in the hope that someone might read it and that it might change their life, it might save their life. And that was why I did it ultimately. But also, for me, there were a lot of things that people in the kind of very early days where my story had come out, people were kind of aware of the headlines. They were aware of kind of what had happened, the situation that I'd been in. But there were a lot of things that I hadn't been able to talk about. And the only way I was able to kind of talk about them was to write them down. And so it was kind of a way of me putting everything that I thought and had done on paper, so that anybody who wanted to know everything, it was there. And so there was nothing that I was kind of holding back, because that was really important for me. I'd been this person who'd kind of held everything in with such a closed book, and I thought, you know what, if I'm gonna bare my soul and tell everyone everything, I'm gonna tell everyone everything, because then there's nothing that I'm keeping. And so that was huge, and it was so hard writing down, and the version that has been published is very different to what I kind of first wrote, for good reason. But it was very raw, it was very emotive, and I just poured my heart and soul onto paper, but I felt so much better for it. And the third reason was, years ago, sadly, we were all hit by lockdown and COVID, and I had been given advice by other people in recovery that was going to be a difficult time for a lot of people and everybody. But as a recovering addict, it was a particularly difficult time, because you had a lot of time, you had a lot of all the things that may have meant that you would have historically turned to something, and so it was very much a lockdown coping mechanism as well, and it really helped with that. I pick it up from now and again, weirdly, and I read bits of it, and I actually found it really hard to read, because it's almost like I feel 7 years on, I just feel like a completely different person, and it kind of reminds me of the person that I once was, which isn't a bad thing, but I look back but don't stare.
Why do you think gambling addiction is just so misunderstood?
It's a very good question. I think there's numerous different reasons for it. One is, I think it's to a degree the same with a lot of addictions, but I think there's this kind of stereotype of what a gambling addict is and looks like, and why somebody might gamble. And weirdly, gambling is kind of either seen as being incredibly glamorous and for kind of high rollers with loads of money, or basically people who've got absolutely nothing and are trying to desperately make money, when actually the reality is most people who gamble fall anywhere between those things. So there is definitely a preconception of what gambling, or why people gamble. The other thing that is a huge kind of misconception about gambling is that it's different to other addictions. So I always say I would have found it much easier to admit that I was an alcoholic or had a drug problem, because I think they're almost acceptable, in inverted commas, addictions. People understand them. They go, actually, I can see why somebody would get addicted to drugs, because you take a drug, get addicted to that feeling, and therefore you need to take more, all those things that we all know. Whereas gambling, there's this sort of concept of, you're an idiot, just stop. Like, you don't have the money to do it, don't do it. It is the same. And I think people don't understand it. It's still a bit of a dirty word. People aren't prepared to be honest and open about their relationship with gambling as they are with other things, and yet it's ingrained in culture and society. I think it's really complicated. So there is just this stigma.
What would you say to someone that is listening right now that they know they have a problem, they're dealing with that shame, and they haven't admitted it to anyone yet?
Don't think gambling will get you out of any problem, because no amount of money will be enough. Talk to somebody, it doesn't matter who it is, because the consequences of not doing it will be worse, and that you haven't got anything. You might feel like you have, but you really haven't got anything to be ashamed of.
You're now working with athletes, with young people, with companies, and you're giving so much advice. Other than opening up and talking to people, what's the message that you would like to try and leave people with?
Addiction for me starts with like a choice, and I made some pretty poor choices in my life, and there are a lot of things that I kind of regret that I've done, and a lot of it boils down to how you feel about yourself. And one of the things I kind of want to get across to people is that a lot of these issues and choices are based on kind of how you feel about yourself, and it's trying to give people the ability to make more positive choices, but also, if they haven't, to realize that you can turn things around. Hopefully my story, people can learn from it, but it also gives people hope.
So what does life look like for you now, Patrick? What's the biggest changes, both internally and externally?
I think the biggest change for me is I'm comfortable in my own skin. I don't try and be someone or something that I'm not. That is massive, because that makes every day a lot easier and a lot more pleasurable if you can wake up and just be yourself, and not try and be something that you think other people need you or want you to be. I think my priorities have changed massively, because for a long time I was driven by fame, by money. I'm now motivated by two things, and that's health and happiness, physical and mental, those two things. I also realise how lucky I am. I try and kind of always look at what I've got rather than what I haven't got, which again was the first 31 years of my life was a desire to have this or be this that other people were, and rather than actually looking at what I've got. I've got an incredible family, now a dad. They're the important things in life, and as cliche and as kind of corny as it sounds, for my personal recovery, they are the most important things, and they have to come first. And if those things are in place, then everything else takes care of itself.
What did recovery teach you about identity or masculinity, or about being vulnerable?
I mean, I think more than anything is that for 31 years of my life, I was that person who thought that showing vulnerability was a sign of weakness. I now realise that actually it's the opposite. It's a sign of strength and courage, and people respect you for it. Everybody's different and everybody's amazing in their own way, and just being yourself, being authentic is the most important thing. And we live in a world now which is hard because it's stressful. There's a lot of pressure. We spend our lives comparing ourselves to other people, everything that comes with that. But I think recovery taught me to be myself and to love myself. And love myself sounds weird, but in the right way.
Is there a moment now where you feel really proud, truly proud of the man that you've become?
God, that's a really difficult question. I think I'm I'm proud of who I am now. I'm not proud of who I used to be. I don't like who I used to be. But without having... One of the hardest questions I get asked is knowing what I do now and everything I've been through. Am I glad that it happened? No, I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. But the one thing I do know is that I'm fundamentally a better person for it. I think I'm proud of how I've dealt with what went on and the situation I was faced with, the circumstances. I'm proud of kind of how I've overcome that battle and turned it around and become who I am now. But I'm not proud of anything I ever did or who I used to be. So that's where it's kind of a difficult question. I think a lot of people have forgiven me a lot quicker than I'll ever forgive myself. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for the things that I did and what I put other people through. But every day that goes past, I am able to forgive myself a little bit more.
I think the fact that you are so honest about something so vulnerable is really, really honourable. You will help so many people with your book, with just how open you are, because I think it takes a lot, and especially it can be harder for men, like having this idea of masculinity where it is seen as bad to ask for help, or men can be quite misunderstood. I feel like you self-deprecate yourself a little bit because you are doing a fantastic job. There will be a lot of people out there, men and women, that will listen to you and you will really give them hope.
Thank you.
What's next for you?
I'm going to keep shouting about my story and trying to help people. I'm going to actually stop doing my talks because it felt important. I didn't want it to be a forever job because I don't think it's healthy to let it continue to consume you. And it's exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting. And with a young family, I kind of don't want to be defined by it. I want to be defined by my recovery, and so find a bit more of a balance, a new challenge. I don't know what that's going to look like, but it's exciting. But I think you're right as well. Young men need kind of very different role models to what they have access to a lot of the time, or what are deemed to be good role models, and yeah, hopefully I can continue to be that as well.
Totally understand what you're saying about wanting to separate the two and live your life and this new exciting chapter that you've worked damn hard for. So I'll be rooting for you from the sidelines, and I wish you and your family all the best.
It's a pleasure.
Wow, I'll be honest, you guys, that was really a conversation I'm never going to forget. Patrick's story, it's not just about gambling. It's about shame, silence, second chances, and also the bravery it takes to tell the truth. If you're listening right now and you are struggling with something, let Patrick's journey remind you that you are not alone. Recovery really is possible, but it does take a leap of faith with that one honest moment. If this episode has touched you, please share it because you never know who might need it. Patrick, thank you for showing us all what it means to fall hard and then to still rise. If you liked today's episode, give it a like, a share, and I'll be back next time with more Steph and Tea.